oh, you can't say that, you know. But I do. Very dark humour. Very dark humour. Sometimes gets me into trouble. Sometimes gets me banned from places, you know. They tried to, when I was doing my Personality Plus exhibition at the Tate Modern, I was graphic photographs, and they kind of went out on the internet, and all these like American evangelical people were like, "Ooh, Satans," you know. So what?
But it's not a guest-free zone at all, because we've got John Langley here, who stood for mayor of Bristol a few years ago. John, why did you decide you wanted to stand for mayor?
Yeah, with all that content, I'll be in and out of here within 30 seconds. Thank you for inviting me back. You're very kind. Most people don't. What made me stand for mayor? Well, that's a question I'm still asking myself, and my psychiatrist keeps asking me. No, I'm joking. I stood for mayor because I believed Bristol needed a change, and it needed more sensible politics that weren't party political driven.
One of the headlines when you stood was that you'd been a former pornography star.
Oh God, yeah. Didn't that get me publicity? You know, I got millions of subscribers overnight on the basis of that. So, you know, every cloud, as they say.
And one of the reasons I wanted you to come along, John, is because you're just in the process of publishing it's effectively an autobiography.
It's out now. It's on. What is it on? Remind me. It's on Amazon.
Oh dear, not Amazon. Oh well. Okay.
Someone had to.
Yeah. So I mean, what's the title of the autobiography?
It is called The Sexual Philanthropist.
Right. As you said, a bit of clickbait there.
It is clickbait. Exactly. Clickbait,
but I mean, you've been through your ups and downs over the years, haven't you?
Yeah,
so can you tell us, first of all, you know, what were you up to before the world of porn?
I led, I would guess, what one might describe to be a peripatetic lifestyle. So I left home. It's like you're shrugging your shoulders, like you never heard of the word. We can Google it quickly for you. But no, I just
it means you a wanderer.
Thank you. Yes, it meant I was a wanderer. So I joined the army. The army threw me out.
How long were you in the army for?
About 6 weeks.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, and they were marvellous. I mean,
did you even get a chance to for them to decide which part of the army you were going to be in? I mean,
yeah, the Royal Army Medical Corps.
Right. Oh, okay. And why did they throw you out?
Well, what happened was the captain called me into the office one day and said, "Would you really like to serve your Queen and country?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "Well, the best thing you could do would be to leave then." And so they were very accommodating, and you know,
why?
They packed my bags and even took them to the gates for me and even ordered me a taxi.
Did your face not fit, or what?
I was too boisterous, I would say. You know,
disobedient.
Yeah, well, that's another word for it. Yeah, I wouldn't take no for an answer, and it was the sort of thing where if somebody barks an order at me, I'll say, "Well, excuse me, do you know the word, please?" You know, and that doesn't tend to go down very well.
Well, it doesn't really work in a war situation, does it?
It doesn't.
You know, because you do need to have a kind of very strict hierarchies.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you know, the army can't really fight, can it? It's pulling itself in all sorts of different directions, especially when it comes to medical matters. You want to make sure that you've got an efficient way of saving people's lives.
But I was brought up to have manners.
Yeah, well, I don't think that really works in the army, does it? Not that I've ever been in the army, but no, in the armed forces generally, I mean, there is a time for manners and there's a time to get on and knuckle down.
Yeah.
So the army, you came out of the army?
Had about 36 different jobs in 18 months.
What part of the country?
In London.
Yeah.
Yeah. And couldn't settle at anything. I just couldn't settle at anything.
So was this 1980s, 70s, what?
Late 70s, early 80s.
Yeah. This was quite a good time in London, actually, wasn't it? I mean, it must have been quite a nice, you know, people were paid reasonably well. I mean, how did you get on?
I ducked and dived here and there.
Survived.
Well, yeah, you know, if you've kind of read any of the books so far, you'll find that I was kind of mixed up with the underworld of Soho at that time.
Mm-hmm.
At arm's length, I have to say.
But you gravitated towards Soho, did you?
Yeah, because it was everything my Roman Catholic upbringing wasn't. It was fascinating to me. You know, there was all these strip clubs and girls hanging outside the doors inviting you in, and it's like, wow, what is this? So it was diametrically opposed to my upbringing, and therefore it became a great fascination to me. And I got to know lots of people, and some of which, to say, were underworld, and it was just a fascinating place. You know, you could go into a cafe and you could be talking to a stripper, or you could be talking to a tourist. It could be anybody, and just listen to conversations and get involved with people, engage with people. And they were very, very down-to-earth people, and it was just a fantastic place to be.
One of the things that you say in the book is that you really loved the idea of just hanging out in cafes, really, and people coming in, new people, you'd chat to them for 5 minutes, you'd never see them again, but it was a whole kind of learning.
It was.
Everyone was sharing the real dope, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, exactly. It was a fascinating place to be, and even to this day you can find me sitting outside cafes looking at the world go by. You know, even when I wrote this book, a lot of inspiration comes from just sitting and observing, and then letting that ideas build up, and creativity, which you then which I then put into words, and it just helped to bring back memories. And I'd look at people and I'd say, "Oh, you remind me of somebody," and then I'd make notes and I'd go back and think, "Yeah, that's who it was." So, even to this day, I'm still in and out of cafes.
Sound like you're a kind of observer of life.
Yes.
That loves doing that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But the thing is, I mean, all this allure of the pornographic world, the sex world, the strip clubs, all that sort of thing, I mean, it's not quite what it seems on the outside, is it?
No. It's full of scammers and all kinds of... Well, it was in those days. You know, I remember... in certain, you know, what they call the clip joints and places like that.
So what was a clip joint?
Oh, a clip joint is where you would go and pay extortionate amounts of money for a bottle of champagne, and just a rip-off, basically. And the girls would sit there quietly thinking that, or were leading the customer to believe that they were drinking alcohol, when really it was just a glass of water and they were putting it in the nearest plant pot.
So it's a kind of escort girl style, just to be with someone attractive, and you're paying extra money, and they will share conversation with you, that sort of thing.
And the best one was you'd have a guy and a girl at the top of the stairs, and they go, "Right, come in and see the show," and they'd be selling tickets. And then whoever bought the ticket would go down the back of the stairs and find themselves in a car park. By which time they came back up the stairs, they were gone. They were gone off to the next one. You know, it was full of rackets, and it was just fascinating. It was a script in itself. It really was.
Yeah. And did you end up? How did you get? I mean, it's one thing taking an interest in this part of London.
Yeah.
It's a whole other thing taking your clothes off and being filmed.
Yeah. Well, I escalated. I suppose you could call it escalated over a number of years. Now, that was actually quite interesting, because when video cameras first came out, they were these huge, great things like you see television crews with, and they cost about, £2,500. They were hideously expensive. So only the wealthy people, or the people who had more disposable income, could actually buy these cameras. And at the time, there was something called the amateur photographer, which I'm sure, one or two of your listeners may well be familiar with. And the back pages were full of classified advertising. And at that time, you could only really buy sort of the adult tapes in sex shops, and they were very much under the counter. And some of these tapes would cost £80, £90, £100 each, because they were smuggled in from places like Sweden. So when these cameras came out, I saw an opportunity and thought, we could be making money out of this. And so, with all...
So this is your Catholic entrepreneur.
This is my Catholic education. Exactly. It taught me well. So, I saw the opportunity for all these guys who wanted to suddenly become porn movie directors. And we advertised in the back of this photographic magazine. And I got myself a girl partner as well. And we were... Back in the 80s, we were charging £75 an hour. And the whole thing was scripted. So half of them didn't even know how the camera worked, but they'd come in and we'd basically I would direct the whole thing, say, right, this is where we're going to start, this is what we're going to do, this is where it's going to end, that's it.
So you say you're paying £75 an hour?
No, I was being paid £75 an hour. And the girl I was working with, she was being paid.
So who did you charge? Who was paying the bill? The guy with the camera?
The guy with the camera.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, if somebody could afford like £2,000 for a camera, they could afford £150. Simple as that. And so that's how it began. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've actually been to a TV station years ago where they were doing this kind of thing with girls sitting on a bed kind of chatting to the camera, all extremely seedy, where people have to play, people have to pay money to go and see this. I mean, this whole pornographic world actually is, I mean, it's morally, you know, it's a temptation for many men, particularly single men, actually for married men as well, sometimes aren't happy in their relationships. But is it actually corrosive, surely? The whole thing is corrosive on the soul.
For some people it will be. I think it's an incredibly empowering position for women.
Well, many women would say that, in fact, most of the pornographic world, should we say, including prostitution, many of the women are actually heroin addicts, and they're reliant on the pimps for their heroin, and they're completely entrapped in that situation.
More so nowadays, but I'm very much for the empowerment of women. And if a woman can use her body to make money, it's an asset, and she is able to do that. And, not everyone is on drugs. If they're able to do that and they feel empowered by it, they feel sexually empowered by it, financially empowered by it, then I would support it all day long.
Yeah, but the thing is, this is a couple of old blokes talking about, women, it's a liberating thing. No, it's not. Surely it's not. It's not. Well, I am speaking for myself. It's not, surely. I mean, it's actually a form of just pure financial exploitation, You stand there and do something. You're a prostitute, you're just being paid a paid monkey to go and do something. It doesn't matter what it is, and there's no moral aspect to it at all. It's just money for old rope.
And who are the mugs? The men who pay it. They're the ones who are exploited, really. I've known girls that do webcam to earn £600 a night doing webcam. I've known escorts, excuse me, who've earned. In fact, I filmed one. She earned £3,200 in 1 week. You wouldn't earn that kind of money elsewhere. Now, what she actually did, and a lot of the girls are very, very clever. She was Romanian. She had set her sights on making £250,000 to go back to Romania and open a beauty salon. And at the end of 2 years, she had enough money to go back and actually do that. And she was 19 years old, and she would never have to go back to doing any sex work again in her life.
I mean, wouldn't it be nice if a Romanian could just open a beauty salon without having to come to London and sell their body for 2 years?
Sure. In the perfect world, it would be, but this isn't the perfect world.
No, it certainly isn't.
It never will be.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say, don't bet on that. I think, there are some things are getting worse, some things are getting better. But certainly, you must have seen in your lifetime quite a lot of changes in the acceptance and the morality of porn.
Yeah, a great deal. A lot of things that would have been taboo many, many years ago have now become more accepted. A lot more people are open to. I mean, look, I had up to 10 million viewers, fans, followers, supporters. So it just goes to show the demand for it. Now, what is worrying, and I think what we should be concerned about, moreover, is now that AI is coming in, it's making people redundant from that industry. Because, for instance, let us say you could you decide that you want the body of one actress on the face of another, and have sex with her all day long. Right? That's the way it's going. Having said that, what's even more worrying, and I think it's something that we should all be worried about, is that you could do exactly the same thing with children. It's AI It's out there. You could have a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old, do whatever you like with them, and there's nothing that anybody can do about it because it's AI, it is fantasy, it is... You're not...
Well, they have these things called love robots, don't they, now, which are, I think, isn't it, the Japanese have become particularly big on. I mean, this is... Yeah, I mean...
This is worrying.
It's straying into the area, and it's bound to. And I wonder if you ever saw this in London, in Soho, straying into the area of child pornography.
Yeah. I've never seen child pornography, thankfully. I've never wanted to.
But, I mean, the temptation amongst these underground people, surely, is to go for ever younger girls.
There's younger and there's younger. I think if anybody is 18, then it's acceptable. I think anything... In fact, I think this ridiculous idea about, you can get a driving licence 17, you can't buy fags till you're 25, you can have sex at 16. For God, it's just absolutely ridiculous. One age, 18, 21 for the lot, absolutely fine. Everyone knows where they stand. But as far as anything younger, then that's an absolute no-no. And as I said,
I mean, there's this at the far end of the world you're involved in is the Jimmy Saviles, isn't it?
Oh yes, absolutely, absolutely. And I think the higher you are in power, the more corruption there is, and the more likelihood there is for such things like the Jimmy Savile.
Did you see? Did you know anything about Savile when you were in London?
No.
Was it completely news to you when it all broke?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't for me. I mean, I'd been told rumours about him. I also been told rumours about Cliff Richard.
Yeah.
And so you're never quite sure until these sort of things come out. And obviously it is kept away from the public. It's kept away from many journalists. Although, of course, there is also this rather frightening idea that many journalists know things that they're just simply not allowed to write about, not even in opinion pieces.
That's right. Yeah, I know.
So the world stays quiet.
Yeah.
So what did you make of it when it all came out? What did you think? I mean, this establishment paedophile, one of the most famous people in the country, all over the BBC, on the radio, and on Jim Will Fix It, and suddenly... he's doing a program where he has these little kids sitting on his knee, but he is the biggest paedophile Britain has ever seen.
Yeah, and he was well protected by the establishment. And the reason I think behind it is that there were too many other names involved. It's, and I think you could pretty much say the same thing about the Prince Andrew Epstein story nowadays. I think there's a whole lot more to come out of it that hasn't been said so far. I think
a lot of it is in Whitney Webb's book.
Yeah, Maxwell
One Nation Under Blackmail. If anyone's interested in the whole network in the States, particularly around that, where the idea was. Back in the Second World War, the underworld in the States was mobilised to fight Hitler. After the war, that group still kept going, and they realised that, we can use this for blackmail.
Yeah, and I think Ghislaine Maxwell knows a lot more than she's saying as well. And that may come to light at some point. But for now, it just, it's just there in the air, and I think there's a point where every truth comes to light, and her day will come.
So, what about the other end of the spectrum then? Because what about this basic idea that sex is actually something sacred that should only take place within marriage? The idea that it's taking place here, there, and everywhere is creating all these potentially unwanted children.
Yeah, I know. Have you seen the piece in the book that I've read? No. I'm just said that sex is great. And I do think half the problem now is that the world is becoming overpopulated because it's seen as a sort of biblical done thing where men and women get together and they have to have children, and I don't think it's necessary. There's
more abortion than there's ever been in history.
And there's also a big fight back from some couples who don't think the world is a safer place now to have children. So that's moving along as well. But if I had my time again, I certainly would not be having children now. I don't think it's the right place for children at all.
Well, that's a world that's changed, isn't it? I mean, certainly when we were growing up, it was lots and lots of positivity. I was over in Moscow back in 2015, and I looked around the streets of Moscow and saw the same sort of positivity that was in London in the 60s and 70s, which was, we think the future's ours. A lot of the young people felt the future's ours, and now I think for a lot of young people, they're looking at the adult population and say, "What kind of world have you left us?"
Exactly. Yeah. I agree. I agree, and I've gone into it in detail in the book and said the world is overpopulated, and do we really need to be having more children when the resources are getting less? And I don't think it's a viable thing to have children.
There's a lot of people now talking about depopulation, so you think that's a good thing?
Yeah. And I think it's, people have to make their own choices. I mean, I'm not saying it's wrong to have children, and people, if they feel they want to have children,
people have surely always made their own choices about having kids.
Yeah.
And if you look at the statistics around the world, you'll find the poorer countries that have the most children.
Yeah.
So poverty is actually fueling a booming population. But I certainly take issue with you as to whether there really is any real overpopulation. Yeah. Surely the problem is with distribution of wealth, resources, food, all that stuff. It's being hoarded. It's being hoarded.
Agreed.
I mean, look at this business with eggs at the moment. It's a bit of a joke. The farmers are saying, well, the supermarkets won't pay proper prices for them. And so, because, basically it's the supermarket cartels getting together. Doing price fixing, and that means that you can only get eggs from the small shops, farm shops, and things like that. But they're trying to, the big players in the world of food are very good now because there are so few of them are actually fixing prices, and this is one of the reasons people are hungry, because surely because the market is being fixed.
Yeah, and capitalisation has a lot to do with it. There's a big power challenge between the haves and the have-nots, where the Western world is all about money and capitalism and all the rest of it, and the other side of the world, which is poverty-stricken, has nothing. There is absolutely no balance whatsoever.
It's like a chasm, I think. I mean, certainly the way I see it, it's a chasm opening between the haves and the have-nots, which is something we were always brought up to abhor, in my youth. This is all wrong, you can't do this. The whole point of the government is to try and make sure at least there's a reasonable amount of redistribution of wealth. But at the moment, it seems to be the opposite.
No, there's a lot of hoarding of wealth. And that is a major problem, and will continue to be a major problem as long as people allow it to be.
Well, you've had your ups and downs, most definitely. Not just on the screen. You've also ended up homeless for a while, didn't you? Can you just tell us how that happened and take us through how you survived that, how you coped with that, what it was like?
I became voluntarily homeless because of, as I say, my insistence on leading a peripatetic lifestyle. And so I took myself around the country to various places, and it was, for me, it was very much an adventure. I kind of enjoyed the just being able to go from place to place and to meet new people. And so my life then was very much about, I always wanted to learn new things. I always wanted to learn about new people. I would learn how things worked. And so by taking myself around the country, it gave me the opportunity to do that. So I became voluntarily homeless rather than involuntary homeless. And it took me everywhere from London to Manchester to Liverpool to Scotland.
Well, how are you paying your way? How are you sleeping? How are you eating?
I was scraping by in whichever way I could. I never begged for money. I always managed to find money. I don't know, it was one of those things where life looked kindly upon me, and I always had access to money. It wasn't never a lot, because when you're living homeless, I didn't need a lot to survive.
So I mean, where were you getting your money from? Were you doing little odd jobs?
Yeah,
or what?
I was dishwashing in certain. Right, if you want to eat, you dishwash in restaurants. If you want to try, I mean, I would buy and sell stuff. So like on the streets and things if I wanted to travel anywhere. Or else, like, in the old days, you could thumb a lift and you feel relatively safe. So I always got around, and I had benefits that were coming in as well when the social security people at the time actually recognised I lived, because at one time I went in and said, "Hi, this is me," and they looked me up and said, "Well, you don't exist," and I said, "Well, yes, I do." So I got through that. So I kind of lived on the kindness of other people,
and the dole.
Yeah, and a little bit of the dole here and there. Yeah.
What about drugs? Were you near that world? You surely must have been in London and in Soho. Drugs are always around.
I wasn't within the homeless scene because the favoured, if you like, drug, I use the term loosely, in the homeless scene was alcohol. That was the drug there. So I'd always been around pot. I'd always been around weed, and I imbibed a little myself, and I sold it here and there in order to keep myself going. And it was the pot world was a very different world then. It was black, and it was red seal, and it was gold seal, and it was all compressed. And it wasn't polluted like it now, like the hybrid stuff nowadays.
We've got this kind of skunk world that appeared in the was it the late 90s or something like that?
And mostly that came from
genetically modified?
Genetically modified, mostly by the Sensi Seed Bank in Amsterdam. They were really the sort of pioneers behind it, as far as I'm aware. And it just grew into this hybrid stuff, which was... And I have a problem with it because it's all about commercialization. In the old days, when you had a little lump of, hash, it was pure, and you got on with people, and you sat around and you had philosophical conversations, and everyone got on, and it wasn't about getting off your face, it was just about chilling and mellowing. And then the hybrid stuff came in, and it changed the face of the weed industry completely. And now you've got people going off their face, and it's just wrong, and it's about the money nowadays. And weed or hash in those days was never, ever, ever about the money. It was about the pleasure, the enjoyment of sharing and the experience.
Like many things, seems to have been sort of denuded over the years, and sort of commercialised, or the fun taken out of it, maybe.
Exactly.
So, how come you've ended up in Bristol?
Well, I was actually in Taunton before I came here. And I needed to be back in civilization again. So Taunton's a kind of, it's a nice little place, and and it's great if you like cider, and it's nice to drive through, and it's nice if you like ticket. But Taunton's the kind of, like some other places around the country, Taunton's the kind of place where if it could look itself in the mirror, it would become best friends with a Samaritan's hotline. So I decided to leave Taunton and come to Bristol because I like city life. And that's how I ended up here. Just getting back to this whole business of being homeless. Were you sleeping in shop doorways? Where were you sleeping? Oh God, where didn't I sleep? I slept in a phone box once. That was interesting. Park benches. Mostly night shelters, and where I could get a tent, then I would be out and about and sleeping out and about.
How did you get on with the street people out there?
In those days, they were lovely. They were gentlemen of the road. They weren't like the people you see nowadays. So you were talking
about, when you're talking about 1980s?
Yeah, 1980s into 1990s.
Right.
They were guys who just liked myself. Just like travelling around the country from place to place, you could sit down and they had real life stories that they wanted to talk about. And they were really interesting people. I mean, they liked the Jake, the booze, as well. But for the most part, they weren't violent, they weren't aggressive, they weren't challenging in any way at all. They were just generally nice people, and I hear great stories, and on occasion, sadly, I'd be speaking to someone and saying good night to them in the morning. I'd wake up and they'd be dead beside me. And some of the times were quite tragic in that way. But life on the road, as it is now, is very different to what it was then.
Why?
drugs, I would say, play a greater part nowadays. Things like spice, which weren't around in those days. All the other drugs which are available. I mean, people on the road then weren't on heroin, and they weren't on cocaine and other stuff. So the availability of drugs now makes it very difficult for people. And I can understand if you're living Groundhog Day all the time, you need something to sort of take the pain away from the lifestyle that you're living. And so it would be very easy to slip into the drug routine. But again, it's just how society's changed over the years and how much more pressure is on younger people. Well, not necessarily even younger people nowadays, because there are all kinds out there.
Well, look, the book's called The Sexual Philanthropist. In what way are you a philanthropist?
I was sexually very philanthropic.
What do you mean by that?
Everything I did was for nothing, because none of it was about making money. None of it at all.
Did you manage to make any money?
No,
not
really.
Really.
Nothing to do you know, it used to make me laugh when the press used to call me a porn baron. And I had this guy come down from Northampton once. Oh, yeah, Johnny, I'm going to get to know you. And I'm sure he lived in a mansion, that he thought I lived in a mansion, had a Bentley. And when he came down and saw I lived in a 2-bedroom maisonette in Brislington, it was such a shock to him, because he expected this porn baron, and I wasn't interested in that. I just did it for the hell of it. I did it for the challenge, not for the money. And the fact that the internet was, you see, people, I think, generally believe that it's all about the sex. Now, sex was secondary to me. It was all about getting on the internet. It was all about building the audience. It was all about the marketing, the advertising, the editing, all the stuff behind the scenes that make it happen. That's what it was about. That was the interesting part. Sex was actually the boring part.
So did you ever build and keep a relationship with a woman, or?
Oh, I've had I've had some. Yeah, absolutely. Not so much back then, but in more recent years, in the last sort of 4 to 5 years, I've had some brilliant relationships with women, which you can read about in the book. But yeah, I've had some brilliant relationships.
What about, okay, just finishing on the book now, let's, have you got an anecdote you can tell us from the book, which just gives us an idea of some of the range of your experiences over the years? Is something which really stands out in your mind as, wow, that was a bit of a lesson there?
Everything has been a lesson. I couldn't single out one particular
this is what I'm trying to press you to do. That just take us through. I mean, you're talking about waking up next door to someone next to someone who's just died.
Yeah.
Now we don't do that every day.
No.
And you were working in a very interesting, seedy world in Soho. So you must have an anecdote you can tell us from the book.
Have you read about Keith? You didn't get as far. Keith was a bit of a pothead in Liverpool, and we were out one day and we met this guy called Norman, and got chatting to him and sat on the bench, and I looked across and Norman is this guy. Norman's like, and I said to Keith, I said, I think he's dead, you see. So what are we going to do? And he looked at me and said, well, look, I said, we've got to get him to hospital. He said, well, I can go and get a shopping trolley. I said, we can't wheel this guy's dead body through the streets to the hospital on a shopping trolley. So I said, look, we've got to find a way of getting this guy to the hospital and just leaving him at the hospital to let the nurses and the medical staff deal with him, you know, so that he can just carry on dead in peace. So Keith, being the brilliant kind of idealist that he was on part, decided it would be a good idea to sort of go and have a look around. And by this time, Norman's head had slumped forward, because obviously, you know, he'd gone. It's finished. So Keith came back with a collar, a medical collar. I said, where'd you get that from? He said, "Oh, there's some kid down the end of the park." He said, "I, gave him some weed and a tenner and got the." And I said, "Oh my God, you're joking! Please don't do this." So in the end, we got poor old Norman back to the hospital in Liverpool with a pair of sunnies on, this collar, and left him outside of the hospital to pass on in peace and be cared for and looked after.
Wow, life in the raw. Fascinating stuff. Anyway, so yeah, the book is The Sexual Philanthropist, just out, from John Langley, who also stood as mayor of Bristol. Someone, John, that stood against you and won, I believe, was George Ferguson.
Oh, Georgie, yeah.
Yeah, so he was the first independent mayor of Bristol. But anyway, let's let him speak for himself, because we've got all sorts going on. We've had all sorts of controversy this week because some of the big planning applications that have been slated to be signed off by Marvellous Marvin the Mayor, the so-called Labour Mayor of Bristol, that seems to actually just simply work for land speculators and anything else, for example, having a debate about fair rents and then putting up the rents of the people in the harbour who actually live in the harbour up by between 200 and 300%.
I mean, he's the guy that Colston's statue came down and Marvin's statue's going to go up. Is that right?
I don't know about that. Well, I certainly hope not, because he's blighting the city as mayor, I'd say, through his absolute. He's basically taken all the brakes off of planning. So all the city centre land, the big developers are going, well, crikey, look, we've got no kind of real planning going on in Bristol now, so we can just we can get planning permission to build multi-storey office blocks. But anyway, one of the most horrific places they've been doing this is up at Bristol Zoo, where the wink and the nod have been given to the Bristol Zoo people.
Bristol Zoo is another euphemism for City Hall, I believe.
It is as well, yes, very good. But up at the zoo, which some people remember through Johnny Morris on the TV, it's in fact, is the oldest provincial zoo in Europe. They've now decided that the land is worth much more, putting luxury flats on it, than it is as a zoo. So they've closed the zoo. The zoo has been moved out to the M5. Anyway,
that's to be fun for the motorists then.
But this week there was due to be decisions on giving planning permission to this zoo development and other developments around the city. Only thing is, the planning meeting on Wednesday was cancelled. I don't know if you'd heard about that. There was this never happens. That somehow the head of planning at Bristol City Council this week has resigned. So there is obviously some pushback against the mayor just giving planning permission to these speculators here, there and everywhere. And it seems that he's on a mission in his last year in office, because he's going next May to make as much money for his speculator friends as he possibly can by blighting the future of the city. And so and so there is a protest going on Sunday, quite a well-organised and measured one, which is starting at the Victoria Rooms up by Clifton Triangle.
On Sunday,
On Sunday, and also people can come to the zoo as well if they want to hear speeches and that sort of thing.
Well, the zoo that was, you mean?
Yeah, where the zoo still just about is. Well, they want to, there's a lot of people in the city that are saying, well, look, you can move some of the big animals out, but we need to keep this as a visitor attraction.
But what's going to be there? Hang on. They're all right moving the animals out, but then what's going to be there?
Well, there's all the smaller animals they're thinking about keeping.
Right, okay. Like the hamsters.
I think the idea is that, there is a sort of general feeling that having these big animals like elephants and things like that in captivity is not a good idea. It's a bit cruel, gorillas and that sort of thing. And so let's have a Bristol could be the place where we have a vision for the new kind of zoo, which is much more animal friendly, much more people friendly and more ethical.
Absolutely. And I think George was a legend, and it's a shame he didn't stay in as mayor, because I think the city would be very much different now. And I'm sure there are people out there who perhaps were against him at the time who now think, actually, I wish George was back in office.
Well, that's right. 8 years ago, he was pipped at the post by Marvin Rees for the Labour. But, I mean, this is largely because, surely, because the Conservatives were so disliked nationally that Bristol voters saw an opportunity to vote in a Labour mayor here.
Mm. And I think they made a mistake. Same as I think, really, when Barbara Jank was mayor, I think the Liberal Democrats were doing
she was council leader, to be fair.
No, council leader.
And that's the system we're going back to next year, apparently.
Yeah. And I think the Lib Dems actually did a pretty good job as well. And it's a shame they lost. But however, George got in, and whatever people might say about him, he was a very honest man. He was always upfront about what he was going to do. There was no hidden agendas with George.
I remember him also turning up at the Anarchist book fair. Do you remember that?
Yeah, you either liked him, he didn't.
And then he turns up at the Anarchist book fair at the Trinity Centre, and he got a cup of hot coffee thrown over him.
Yeah.
But at least he was there.
He was there, exactly.
And he was wanting to engage with people of all political bents, wasn't he, and persuasions.
I know, and it's such a shame he's gone, because I don't think the city would be in the mess.
Well, the thing is, in a way, he hasn't gone, because he's been galvanising support for this campaign against this luxury development.
Yeah.
And it does certainly look as if it may have been involved in this decision this week to cancel the planning. The planning committee. I mean, if George is right, and Marvin Rees and Kevin Slocum up at the mayor's office are trying to take control of the planning system in Bristol, which is supposed to be judicially independent, it could possibly be like a showdown, really, between the legal framework for planning and the mayor's office.
Yeah, I know, but my fear is that when people leave. To go on this march on Sunday, that they'll end up at what was the zoo site and find a brick wall to bang their heads against. That's my concern.
Well, what do you mean?
I just don't.
You don't think they're going to get anywhere with it?
No.
Well, I think they may well do, because I mean, if it's come to the resignation of the head of the planning on Bristol City Council, and he's decided he's had enough, he's walking away. It sounds to me as if he's being lent on to make decisions which may be illegal.
Doesn't it just prove to
unlawful, maybe?
All right, but doesn't that again just go to prove how, and I use the word loosely, corrupt this council is?
I think you're right. I remember years ago being in a lift at an award ceremony. Somebody from another council, I think it was Liverpool, was saying, "Oh, you're from Bristol. I feel so sorry for you." We always get tales of corruption from Bristol. It's one of the most corrupt city councils in the country. Yeah. I was like, was it? I didn't realise that. But anyway, look, let's have a look at some of the other problems going on here in the city. Since you're here, since you're not mayor, you can still talk about these things. Bristol's bus network is near collapse, says Bristol 24/7. In fact, this is in the Post as well, I think. There are all sorts of problems with the buses, aren't there? And there have been lots of calls to bring back in the whole franchise system. But
I thought they were being replaced with tuk-tuks.
With what?
There's tuk-tuks, those little things they have in the Far East with 3 wheels that they ferry people around on.
But anyway, this is Labour councillor Mark Bradshaw having a pop at his mayor, saying he's never seen anything on this scale in his 17 years on Bristol City Council. Speaking at a West of England Combined Authority Audit Committee, members are airing serious concerns about routes that would soon be lost from April, many in poorer areas. Bedminster councillor Bradshaw narrowly missed out on becoming the mayor candidate against Marvin, apparently. But it says that... unique distinction of being sacked from both George Ferguson and Marvin Rees's cabinets. He told the meeting there is a real crisis in passenger transport in our region. There seems to be a near collapse of the bus network. I've never seen anything on this scale. And what he's referring to, of course, is the fact that we've got this clean air charge. A lot of people are saying, well, if I can't use my car in the city centre, well, hang on, the bus is cancelled too.
It is an absolute... Is it a show? In which case I apologise if I've offended anybody by using it, but I cannot think of better terminology for this city.
Well, corrupt.
Well, OK, we'll use corrupt then. Although I think...
the priorities are all wrong. It seems to me we've got a mayor that his priorities are around lining the pockets of the rich and planning speculators. I mean, we had Simon Culhane, who was a councillor in Malmesbury a couple of weeks ago, saying, well, there's no gold mine in Malmesbury anymore, and there's no silver mine. But what there is planning permission.
Yeah.
And with planning permission, you can turn a piece of land that's worth maybe £1 million into one that's worth 100, 500, 700, nearly £1 billion. Because this is a way of just a decision going through the council, and suddenly whoever owns that land, as they hit the jackpot. Basically, they can multiply their investment by 100.
There's a boxing site up Eastern Way that kind of rings bells there. But anyway,
sorry, what are you referring to? What?
Oh, isn't there a boxing sort of gym site up near Eastern that's been the subject of some discussion in private eye about the land value?
Oh, right, that's right. Yeah, well, this is a piece of land that the mayor has given to his boxing club that he was boxing at. It's worth about £1.3 million.
A nice piece of asset there. But anyway, let's get back to the transport. What's happening is it's hitting the people with the lowest incomes. And that is the sad... I mean, let us take, for instance, the homeless charities who bring their vans into the city every day to feed and clothe the homeless that have to pay this clean air zone charge, who are now forced to be going out of business. And where does that leave the homeless if they're not going to get their meals or their clothing on a daily basis? It affects the low-paid, on-benefits people. It affects carers who need to get in and out of the city in order to do their shopping. All of this hits the people who can least afford it. And what about the one-man band self-employed who suddenly can't find that to go out and replace a boiler or whatever, he's going to have to carry a new one on the bus with all the ladders and whatever else he needs? It's ridiculous.
It is insane. Now, I won't use your term, but it certainly does seem to be a bit of a mess at City Council at the moment, particularly the idea that something like the planning committee has to be cancelled, the chief planning officer has to go. Something's obviously going on. The gold mine is not delivering the gold it was supposed to deliver. So I'm going to run through a few stories to do with the mess that Bristol City Council seems to be in under Marvin the Marvellous Mayor.
The mire.
The what?
We can say
the
mire.
Yeah, we could say that. Yes. The smelly marsh. How about that?
The excrement that hits the fan.
Well, I hope it is. Yeah, it's about time. Yeah. Police investigate alleged fraud at Avonmouth Recycling Centre. Well, this is the tip basically for big lorries that take rubbish down to Avonmouth. Some of it which gets just burnt and incinerated, and it's rather hilarious that you've got a clean air zone in a city where just upwind of you've got an incinerator chucking out poison into the air, and that which has been given planning permission by the council, and they seem to love them. But anyway, what's been going on up there is the drivers of these waste lorries have been passing cash to the Bristol Waste Council employees at the gate, and they've been saying, oh, well, he's got lots and lots of waste here, or he's not got any waste here, or whatever, so that they don't have to pay the charges. Now, this is the mob. This is exactly how the mob operates, isn't it?
Backhand money.
Yeah. So that's been going on.
Well, why am I not surprised, you see?
Council could scrap its companies amid very serious concerns about Bristol Waste's future.
Well, they made such a good of the electricity company, I'm not surprised.
Yeah, that's right, electricity company. We've got a waste company that's supposed to be emptying the bins.
But they can't run a council either.
And they've got a house building company. All of them are in deep trouble.
By the way?
Well, apparently there are a few houses have been built. I mean, there was a private development that the mayor Marvin was saying was going to be fantastic down at what's called the Boat Yard on the Bath Road, just along the side of the River Avon here.
And the one that's sinking into the river.
That's right. Yes, it's a massive subsidence underneath it. And so is it no longer, is it not going to be affordable housing, 17 stories or something for affordable housing, but they built it right out over the river, and now the bank of the river is starting to subside, so one does wonder whether the whole thing is just going to tip into the river and a few boats might be able to moor on the balconies of the slanted sideways.
I think you're on the verge of having Bristol's answer to Have I Got News for You here.
The council could scrap its companies, as I've said, and also no analysis has been done on bringing the buses back into public control. Well, this is the Wecker mayor, Dan Norris, who said that we have two mayors. We're so lucky around here. He's of a wider area than Marvin, the mayor, and he is supposed to be in charge of public transport, and he's supposed to have been doing some plan in order to bring the buses back into public control.
I like your use of the word supposed.
Yeah, because apparently it's not been done. There has been no analysis done on bringing the buses back under public control, despite the West of England Metro Mayor's claims. So he's saying it has been done. Other people on the committee at the West of England Mayor say it hasn't been done. And so as a result of all this, now bickering and mistrust lands Wecker, West of England Combined Authority, on the government watch list. So they're saying that this is so dysfunctional, this new... Well, it's fairly new. It's about 10 years old or so. That the government is keeping a very close eye on it, because they think that they're actually dysfunctional and they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, despite all the public money that's been shoveled in their direction. Another West of England council has called for a franchising bus system for the Bristol region. Of course, this is because the bus system is collapsing, and
we're having a Uber type service, I believe.
As we see quite often here, as our engineer Dave, we were waiting for the bus for him in the evenings. Quite often we'll see a bus appearing on the screen. It's going to be 15 minutes, 10 minutes, 5 minutes,
2 years,
no minutes, and then it says it's due. No bus arrives, and then it says 30 minutes,
and then 3 buses arrive.
And so it's what they call a ghost bus. So there's no actual real bus there, but it's there on the system, and one wonders whether they're getting paid, for that bus running.
I tell you, I got one for you. Right, I know a few bus drivers who have been with the company a long time, and what West of it, this bus company is doing at the moment.
This is First Group, isn't it?
Thank you. Yeah, First Group. They're using agency drivers at £200 a day, right, who also get their hotels paid for. And these agency drivers travel around from city to city, making £1,000 a week in their pockets and having their accommodation paid for. I mean, what a fantastic life. We should all be doing this. Right? So that's how the local bus service is run at the moment, on agency drivers being paid £1,000 a week, far more than your employed bus drivers are making, and coining it.
Meanwhile, Marvin, the marvellous mayor, this week has said there will be a underground system here in Bristol.
Oh, no, you're joking.
Yeah, that's what he's saying.
God.
All those promises that I made when I first became mayor, they were really all true. And, of course, there are other people who are saying, actually, the rock round here is not suitable for building underground. So, anyway, the rapid transit, Marvin is saying, could be only £7 billion, but has to go partly underground.
I see a pig passing above our heads as we speak.
Well, we did hear about things like powerboat racing in the floating harbour, didn't we? But that never happened. So what do you think is going on? It's a kind of almost like it looks to me a little bit like a kind of the mayor's meltdown.
Look, this idea of... Have you heard the recent cost of HS2 that are going absolutely through the roof? And this lunatic of a mayor thinks it's a brilliant idea to tunnel under Bristol through hard rock to build this rapid transport system that's presumably going to be... It's delusions of grandeur.
Well, we had trams during the Second World War.
Yeah, fine.
In fact, if you go to St Mary Redcliffe Church, which I call the Masonic Cathedral, but if you go around into the gardens, the churchyard there, around the back, you can see one of the tram lines actually sticking out of the ground because a bomb hit it in World War II and it flew right up in the air, hundreds of feet in the air, and it landed in the churchyard, and it's still sitting there. But this was the way everyone got around. It was a mass transit system, and it didn't have to go underground at all.
You go to other cities like Nottingham, they've got fantastic services, like Manchester's got fantastic service. And this delusional guy, I don't know what kind of, if at all he's on any medication, but it's certainly not helping him if he is. wants to now tunnel under this city at a cost, and you know what it's going to be like. It'll say, oh, well, it's going to cost 50 million, and then a year on, it's, oh, but now it's going to cost 80 million, and a year on, well, actually now we're very sorry, there's a 2-year hold up, and, you know, we couldn't get past XYZ, so now it's going to be 150 million. I mean, the guy is absolutely delusional.
Okay, well, we're going to move away from Bristol now and look at this plan to build 15-minute cities. And this is an idea which apparently...
Sorry, say it again. Build a what?
15-minute cities.
So they're going to build a city in 15 minutes?
No. You're going to be within 15 minutes of everything you need.
Oh, I see.
And the idea is to create zones in the city where you don't need to travel around in the city. You only need to stay in your zone. And if you do decide you want to drive out of your zone, you have to pay.
It was a segue between Marvin's delusional Underground Railway and building a city in 15 minutes that confused me.
That's right. Well, a 15-minute city isn't quite that, although it might be in this crazy modern world. But anyway,
yes, in Bristol, yes.
So I thought we'd have a listen to a young girl, 12-year-old girl from Oxford. Oh, actually, no, she was speaking in Oxford. She's not from Oxford. Where she explains why she thinks this is a ridiculous idea that they're trying to bring in. Oxford and Canterbury are two of the cities that they're starting to bring this in. But they're saying, well, look, why is it good? And it's like our clean air zone. Why is it a good idea to say that people can only travel within that particular zone and they're not allowed to go from one zone to the next? Why is this supposed to be a good idea when obviously it's going to make people travel further and cause more pollution?
My advice to the British people is, do not trust this person to tell you the truth. He is a greedy person and only has his own selfish interests at heart. His pals at the World Economic Forum are quite openly calling us, we, the people, useless eaters and a waste of resources, adding, they do not need the vast majority of us. They don't need us. Well, quite honestly, I think the whole of humanity would be much happier and much better off without them crazy lunatics. We don't need them, and we don't want them. As long as Klaus Schwab is free, no one is safe. Then there are the foolish people. These are the ones who are helping to build their own prison and the prisons that their children will have to spend their whole lives within, being watched as digital slaves and tracked 24 hours, every second of their life, where privacy will soon become incomprehensible. I'm speaking about those well-paid officials at Oxford City Council who think they have the right to force their madness on the rest of us. And then there's the destruction of local small businesses. Businesses that depend on the free flow of traffic and the freedom of the people to move around and go about their lives freely as they choose, in order for that small business to survive. I could talk about the ignorance of these investors in the creation of these prison systems. Large corporations such as Lloyd's Bank and organisations who are acting in shameful and ungodly ways through ignorance and through corruption. Organisations such as the Church of England, who I am sure would have no part in this if they knew where it was all leading. Again, we see the blind leading the blind. All I can think of saying is, oh my God. Do any of you know what is fast approaching? Let's say my friend lives in Zone 3 and I'm in Zone 1. If, for example, I went to my friend's house in Zone 3, my parents normally come and pick me up in their car. It only takes 10 minutes. So does that mean that they would have to go round the ring road and back into town again? If my mum or dad had to drive round the ring road, it would take 30 minutes, causing much more pollution and leaving a much bigger carbon footprint. They will say, you can walk home. Would that be safe for me to walk home? Me as a 12-year-old walking home in the dark alone. Is that really going to be safe? Then they will say, oh, don't worry about that. We've already thought of that. You'll be safe. We will have 1,000 cameras on the streets following you and tracking you all the way home. Oh, just remember, it's for your safety. What? Are you serious? Do you really think I want to be watched every second of the day? Are you serious? Thousands of cameras tracking my every move until I get home. At this point, I have to ask, is my safety that important to me that I want to be followed by cameras all the way home? Or do I prefer to have freedom than privacy? And also, for your information, I still wouldn't feel safe. No amount of cameras is going to stop someone who wants to attack me. I want to be safe, but not to the extent that I am prepared to give up my freedom and my privacy to have it. Anyone who gives up their freedom for safety deserves neither. As a 12-year-old, I am really concerned about my future. And to Klaus Schwab, I say this. How dare you! How dare you steal my childhood and my future, and the future of all children by enslaving us in your crazy digital surveillance prison. We all know where this is leading, and by the way, Klaus, just for information, I still think you're a complete nutcase. How dare you? Who do you think you are? To me, you are no different from a villain in a James Bond movie, attempting to hold the world hostage in your crazy transhumanist dystopia. And for what? To make more money? More profit? Is there truly any amount of wealth that will satisfy your greed? So people, listen. Make no mistake. These are the first steps of a dystopian reality called 15-minute neighborhoods. From a small seed, a huge tree can grow. Do you know yesterday the temperature was 7 degrees, but today it is 12 degrees. The greedy people are claiming that the zones are to do with climate change. Over the last few decades, the greedy people have managed to convince the people of the world that if the temperature goes up by 1 single degree, 1 degree, that all life will become extinct. How dumb have you got to be to believe that?
So that's Jasmine.
I like her.
another clip from her, recorded in Oxford a couple of weeks ago at the 15-Minute Cities protest. I mean, what did you make of that then, John?
I thought she was articulate. I thought brilliant and hilarious for a 12-year-old.
Well,
and she should be Prime Minister next.
like Greta Thunberg, there are questions about whether she wrote. Did she write that, or is she just reading something that someone else has written? What do you think, listening to it?
I think she's a very articulate girl, and I think she's very clever. And she may well have been given a hand by her parents just to dot the I's and cross the T's. Well, I think she's got it.
You're right, actually, because I did track down one of her parents, Ian Spence, who's Jasmine's dad, and I put that question to him about did you write this or did she? And he said, well, actually, she wrote it. Yeah. I mean, I was there just. Giving her a hand with some of the phrases and things like that, but it was absolutely her, and she insisted on it being her that was in charge.
We could get her as next voter in as next mayor of Bristol.
I think it's quite feasible.
I do. I like the idea. I think we should get a campaign together.
As long as there's still trains running and that she can still get into work, although she doesn't have to walk or go on a bicycle. Anyway,
no, I think we should start a campaign tomorrow.
But certainly, according to him, it's really her words. She just gave him a hand, but it's her ideas. You could certainly feel the passion in her voice.
Absolutely, and listening to her, and without wanting to give myself a massive plug, but there's a lot of what she says that's actually in my book about the way things are going. And so, I can side with her on a lot of what she says.
What do you make of this whole idea of the greedy people? Because she's saying, well, look, I'm not interested in the problems with the climate, the economy, Ukraine, whatever. Yeah. Actually, there's a problem. The real problem is these greedy people.
Exactly. And I again, I've referred to that in my book, and I think there is an imbalance. There is too much greed. And we live in a world of me. We want this, we want that.
But saying that we could be in a sort of slavery system where unless you've got the right dots on your digital ID, you won't be able to eat. That's another stage entirely, isn't it?
Isn't that sort of veering towards where China is at the moment? Absolutely. Oh God, everything's a plug for my book, isn't it?
Go on, if you can, that's fine. Yeah,
but
please.
I've gone into this, and it bothers me that we live in a world that has become so dependent on materialism, so much dependent on goods and how much we have, And that is a major cause, I think, of the problems that we have. And a lot, as I say, is what I call ego-driven.
It's also most insecure people, isn't it?
Exactly.
Anyway, we've got somebody who's not insecure, or at least we hope he's not, anyway, because he's about to become coronated as King of the United Kingdom.
I think you're talking about your producer
of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. That is King Charles. He's going to get his coronation in May. Will you be going, John?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've been given, first class tickets for the front of the queue there.
The problem is, there's been
I've even beaten those two from the breakfast, the mid morning TV. Phil and what's the name?
Well, there are a few problems, aren't there? Because quite a lot of people have been pulling out of the concert. So
Elton John's pulled out.
Yeah, there's a whole list of them.
Spice Girls.
Yep.
Again, I know I'm plugging the book, but I have said, and now, before I make this statement, I want to make it absolutely, totally clear that it is not something I am for. It is not something I would support. And Putin is not someone I would particularly like. However, he does not like this globalization. He is totally against the capitalism and the greed of the Western world. And there is a part of me that thinks the only way to solve it is if he actually drops a massive bomb, levels the world out, and everyone has to start again.
Putin? Well, I mean, maybe the West will drop that bomb. They want to do a bit of depopulation too, don't they?
Well, at the moment, I think Putin might be the answer, and it's a bizarre thing to say, and it's complete irony, but he may well turn out to be the actual saviour of this world and put some sanity back.
But didn't we try that once before with the flood? Let's start again, and it didn't really work, did it?
What, down in the southwest, you mean? Yeah.
No, I'm talking about, Noah's flood.
Oh, Noah's flood.
Right, so let's all start again. Well, it all starts, the idea is, okay, we've got another great chance, and then we muff it up again.
Yeah. But I think there has to be a point when we have to say absolutely no. And I take your point about Noah, but I think this world now has gone too far. It's become far too about me, and what I want, and it's about ego. And I think the only way that's going to solve it is if Putin launches a missile, starts a war, and then people actually do have to start again and work together, because at the moment the world is divided into cohorts and bubbles and people not working together. The world is far more divided, and that is a huge problem that needs to be sorted out.
Well, looking at one international story, because I think it's quite important, I wanted to look at it in the context of the this decision this week to at least attempt by Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, to make an agreement with President Macron about the migrants and stopping the migrant boats coming over. I mean, the obvious thing to do would be to send detectives to find out who's organising it and arrest them. But apparently no. We're going to do other things. The funding for it, obviously, that could be stopped. The people that are making all the money and finding out where that money's coming from. But no, that's the root cause, is the individuals who are arranging these very dangerous. I mean, I was just thinking earlier on, if you had somebody arranging boat trips from Clevedon over to Barry Island here in the Bristol Channel, and someone was doing it in a dinghy and a load of people died because there was no safety procedures whatsoever, then that person would be arrested and something would be done. They'd probably be jailed. But nothing's happening on the channel with that sort of thing. So obviously there needs to be something else happen. But looking at the bigger context, I was shocked and amazed to see what you've got with Rishi Sunak and Macron meeting over in France today is two ex-Goldman Sachs alumni. People who are from Goldman Sachs, these kind of technocrats, and it's worth pointing out that Macron doesn't actually have a political party behind him. Well, he has one that was, just kind of cobbled together just to fund his election as president. And of course, most of his being elected as was public relations and stuff spun out in the press. Now. we've also had this piece of news. Another Goldman Sachs person in the news, and not really reported over here at all. I just saw it pop up on Al Jazeera last night. Is an ex-Goldman Sachs banker has been given 10 years in prison for their role in the 1MDB's fraud scandal over in Malaysia. Roger Ng, that's NG, 50 years old, Goldman Sachs employee over there, completely, he set up a state investment fund and then he just took all the money for himself and his mates. This is the sort of thing that's going on over in the UK, but it's not being prosecuted. But over in Malaysia, they're taking it much more seriously. In a lengthy sentencing hearing, attorneys requested that the judge release Ng on time served. They argued that he'd been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. Poor chap. But the US prosecutors who had asked for a 15-year sentence argued that the $35 million that he received in the scheme had not been recovered, so he's kept the money, and they're saying that he should be let out. But what we're seeing over in is basically organised crime raping the resources of Malaysia. Goldman Sachs. Now, there's no prosecution of resources. Well, yeah, but what's happening is we're being raped of resources here, but there's been no prosecutions. The Malaysians seem to have discovered that actually Goldman Sachs are organised crime.
Yeah. Why am I not surprised? Nothing surprises me anymore, I'm afraid.
Anyway, so let's have a look at the. I mean, what do you make of this migrant, the boat thing?
Oh, I actually thought about this while I was laying in bed this morning, and my thought was, well, if this is the case and we're letting these people in, why don't we just scrap passport systems, scrap border controls, just let anybody who wants to come into the country come in? What's the point of having laws? What's the point of having passports if people can just rock up?
Well, it seems to be a sort of way of punishing Britain for Brexit. That's what it seems to me. But anyway, part of the things getting worse generally and more chaotic, it's the Ordo Ab Chao Brigade we'll be hearing about at the end of the show. I was up on the Downs the other day at Parry's Lane, something like 50. Some of them seem to be moving in permanently. Got actually rather nice caravans with Calagas bottles up there, and the housing thing seems to have just failed.
Yeah, it's all gone very swish. But if you go up to the other end of Easton, up by IKEA, you will find caravans that have completely wrecked, that have been set on fire and left there. It's a very different scenario up there. And I've lived that life. I know what it's like, and it can be very, very difficult for people. But some of those people do have problems and can be disruptive. They're the ones, I think, who need the most care and attention, and some are there because they are not able to be housed when perhaps they should be, and they're the ones who should be looking at. In fact, I know somebody out at Hangrove at the moment, a girl I know is having enormous problems with her caravan, and she's been threatened with eviction. And it's very, very difficult because she doesn't know where she is from one day to the next. But if proper facilities were actually set up within the city or outside of the city, apart from a place up at Avonmouth, then I think it would be a very different scenario. But people need to feel secure in their homes, and it doesn't matter. I mean, I've lived in a tent, I've lived in a bend, I've lived in a gypsy caravan, I've lived in houses, I've lived in flats. And it doesn't matter if you live in a tent, you need to know that you're going to be secure there. Well, speaking as someone who has emphysema, I can tell you that I didn't bother with a mask all the way through, and I'm still here to tell the tale.
How many jabs have you had?
Oh, 2, I think I had. But I just thought it was an absolute load of BS, to be honest with you.
So if it was BS, why did you get yourself jabbed?
Well, it was advised to me by my GP that I would be better off. I mean, I didn't want it, but it was advised to me that by my GP that I would be better off.
Was there any other way you felt coerced to have it rather than just your doctor saying it's a good idea, John?
Well, there was, as I said, you get one lot of information in the left ear and conflicting information in the right ear. But it was the GP who really just said, look, it would be, better for you and less problems for me, to be honest with you, if you just had the jabs. And so I had the jabs.
Yeah, well, we do take advice from these professionals, and sometimes the advice is right, and sometimes it's just influenced by the pharmaceutical industry.
That kind of reminds me of the saying that people would rather believe comfortable lies than uncomfortable truths, which kind of sums up politics altogether.
One person, I think, that did almost more than anybody else to prove just to what extent that you can approach someone in the street and they will do everything they can to agree with you. You used to work here at Radio Bristol, actually, a guy called Chris Morris.
Oh, Chris Morris.
And Chris Morris also then went on. I worked with him up in London at Great London Radio. Great guy to work with. And I'll tell you a little anecdote about him. Right. After we've heard Chris Morris, and he used to do this thing called the feedback report every week.
He's a satirist?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And he used to do the feedback report, which was he went up to people in the street and he would ask them.
He did that thing on paedophilia.
He did, yes, and he did well, that was right. That was, I think, was it Dark or crikey, Brass Eye or something?
Yeah, Brass Eye.
He did a program called The Day to Day for the BBC, and then he went over to Channel 4 to do Brass Eye. But before that, he was in Bristol here. And then he went to GLR in London after Bristol, which is where I got to know him. And this is really where he would go up to someone in the street and he would say something completely absurd to them and utterly ridiculous, and yet amazingly people would just sort of agree with him as if there was so it was called his feedback report. So and on the topic of willful blindness, it's amazing just how people will kind of go along when a microphone is stuck and a camera is stuck in their face. They will kind of go along with what they think they're supposed to say.
Late Night and Cool, this is I'm Chris Morris, this is your local BBC station, and here's tonight's first feedback report. Topical question, not surprising today that we're looking at the issue of wind obedience. What do you feel of the state of it at the moment?
Well, it's a bit disobedient, definitely, isn't it?
It's really rather sad, isn't it, when that wonderful power could be put to such good use.
Oh, yeah.
For example, we could contain it in those storm bags.
Oh, yeah.
Would you agree with the comments of Professor Gus T. Day, who said that we should be making more use of this stuff that's going to be around?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, to harness it.
Yeah.
And perhaps ride it around the Grand National course.
Well, something like that, yeah.
And if we directed its power, we could use it to make beds.
Yeah.
Prop up tables with a directional jet of it.
Oh, yeah, there's all sorts of things, isn't it?
And even to comfort small people who wish they were a bit taller.
Yeah.
Here's tonight's feedback report number 2. Particularly interested to know your feelings on big noise powder.
I think the noise is too much.
Should it be allowed?
It shouldn't, no.
It should be quieter.
Very much quieter.
What colour should it be?
I think it should be something that sticks out so that people know what it represents.
Yeah, like what?
Red.
And what colour shouldn't it be?
Black.
What do you think it should be carried in? Big noise powder.
Well, it should be kept in airtight container.
How much should one individual be allowed to carry?
Very, very small quantity.
Number of grams?
Between 1 and 20.
So there's a couple of examples of Chris's ability to get people to agree in the street to almost anything, John.
It's like Marvin, you mean?
Not necessarily. He doesn't seem to. Maybe you should employ Chris Morris to do that job for him.
PR. Perhaps he could do his PR.
I think he probably would. But the only thing is, where would we be with Chris? But look, I mean,
we'd have a hell of a better time and laugh about it.
Well, maybe. But the point with Chris is he managed to just convince people to kind of go along with whatever nonsense he used to come out with. And when I first got asked to work on his programme, I had quite a difficult. It was on a Saturday in London, and I was taking the phone calls, and he used to do this quite clever thing where he'd say, well, just write down the phone numbers of the first couple of people that give the right answer to the quiz. I think it was a 3-hour show, and we'll call them back in the last 15 minutes. So he would me operating the phones, I would be feeding through just only wrong answers to him for the whole programme until right at the very end of the programme we phoned these people back.
Well, that's COVID for you.
It was just a good, he was kind of he wanted like a cat with a mouse to play with these various people who got the questions wrong. And so he was able to play with the audience a little bit in a kind of harmless way, really.
Would you not think the government would play with us over COVID?
Yeah, but we're talking here about. Well, this is why I'm talking about this. He is taking advantage of the fact that people will believe stuff, and he's actually making an entertainment program out of it.
And Boris is brilliant at that. Don't you think so?
How?
Don't you think Boris is brilliant at that? He was a real stage performer. He had the gift of the gab. He could make things jocular while being serious at the same time, and rally that support and get people behind him. He was brilliant at that.
He certainly seemed to be quite good at it. But anyway, a point I'm really trying to make here is that how amazing it is that you can get people to sort of say and believe and do almost anything, and people just don't want to have that confrontation that says, well. And so I worked on this program with him for the first 3 hours for the first week on a Saturday up in Marylebone High Street, and I just found him really difficult. He'd come through, and he'd asked me these various questions, which were rather like the ones he's asking the public. You think this is complete and utter rubbish. And the second week, I just thought this is, I've got to be kind of reasonably polite to the guy because I'm working for him. My job, my job relies on this. And at the beginning of the second week I was working with him, I said, "Will you shut the F up? You're talking utter B, yeah, and don't think you can fool me. Anyway, so I started shouting.
So you lost your job then?
I started shouting at him. And you know what? He came over, he gave me a pat on the back, and we got on like a house on fire after that.
Yeah.
But you see, it does take that sometimes to acknowledge that. I think he went to a Jesuit school or something like that.
Oh, same as me. Same as me.
Very
sophisticated,
sophisticated chap. I think. No, it wasn't Wimbledon. But anyway, John. Any last thoughts before we say goodbye to you? We're going to have a break now.
Well,
the book, you've got to just plug the book.
Obviously I'd like to thank you for the opportunity of inviting me in. I hope I've made some sense of some things anyway.
Unfortunately, no. But,
well, there we are, you see. That's for the next book. How I Failed on the Friday show.
So it's called The Sexual Philanthropist.
Right, it is called The... Now... there is a kind of website up at the moment, and it's been up there for the last year while I've been trying to flog this thing, flog the idea of it. And it's the-sexual-philanthropist.com. And it basically gives you a sort of a review, if you like, of what the book's going to be about. However, the real deal, which I'm told by Amazon is going to be up within the next 24 to 48 hours and be listed, is the sexual I nearly said fantasist then, philanthropist, and it's about sex, politics, homelessness, alcoholism, drugs, comedy, show business, humour, a great deal of humour and satire, and the dead body in the trolley. There we are. How's that?
Thank you very much, John. So the website is the-sexual-philanthropist.com, and you can also get his book on Amazon
over the weekend
if you feel so inclined.